Wonderful. So good morning, colleagues over here on this side of the pond, and good afternoon, all of you in Asia. I'm glad that you took your time to join us today for the Food Systems and Nutrition Training for Business. A few more people are being added as we speak, but while we wait for them to be admitted, I wanted to just go through a few a light housekeeping message for you all. As you know, this is an outreach event between PSM and CFS, and the event is being recorded and will be made available after to the participants. By remaining on this webinar, though, you agree to be recorded. We're really pleased to offer this session. We would have liked to also offer interpretation. At the moment, we are unable to do so, but this may change in the minutes that follow. In the event it does, we will note it. But we invite you to use the chat function and make this as dynamic as possible of a session for you. And the host will be able to recognize your raised hands, and you can unmute yourself in the appropriate section of the event during the discussion. But of course, due to these COVID times, we're all used to video conferences and some of their hiccups. So we have measures in place to help maintain the integrity of this call. And so should there be a disturbance, please bear with us and we will restore the order shortly. And now, Chair, it's over to you, the chair of the distinguished chair of the UN Committee on World Food Security, Mr. Thanawat Tiensin, who will provide some welcome remarks and an introduction to the voluntary guidelines for food systems and nutrition.
Okay. Thank you very much, Rosemary. Welcome and thank you for joining these business training sessions on food system and nutrition. These events is jointly organized by private sector mechanisms and also International Agri-Food Network and the Committee on World Food Security, CFS. My name is Thanawat Tiensin, chairperson of CFS and also the permanent representative of Thailand to the UN agencies in Rome. I'm delighted to welcome all of you to today's events focusing on CFS voluntary guideline on food system and nutrition and their relevance to food system transformation. Maybe some of you haven't seen it. I can show you now. This one is the voluntary guideline on food system and nutrition, which CFS spent 100 hours with support from the members, from the UN agencies, from the Rome-based agency, FAO, WFP, and IFAD, and also private sector mechanisms, civil society mechanisms, and other stakeholders. We've gone through the difficult negotiation, the virtual negotiation, with great support of His Excellency's Ambassador Hans Holkeveen. Currently, he is the independent chairperson of the FAO Council, and he also is a former permanent representative of the Netherlands to the UN agencies in Rome, and in his capacities as the chairperson of the open-ended working group for the voluntary guideline on food system and nutrition. And thank you again for joining us today, Ambassador Holkeveen. We also have some speakers who will join us at these panelists this morning. This will be followed by a very knowledgeable panels to discuss how the regional food system and nutrition challenges and the potentials for business to use the CFS voluntary guideline on food system and nutrition. This guideline is a valuable tool. It is the only global negotiated products that we have. And after the Food System Summit ended on 22nd of September, the work on food system transformation continue. And that's why the CFS guideline will be a valuable tool. And this panel, we will have a representative from Indonesia, Mr. Chaka Alvidi Arvol. He will discuss with us on the perspective of the member state from Asia, how the members can utilize and can implement it and also apply the voluntary guideline on food system and nutrition at the country level. And next, we will also have Dr. Susan Kevok, the nutrition manager from Nestle, and also members of the private sector mechanisms steering committee. We will hear the view of the global food producers to see the voluntary guideline on food system and nutrition as a tool for the business. And we also have Dr. Fabian De Lit, the professor from Manila Universities and also president of the Integrated Chemists of the Philippines. We will hear from him what the researchers look at the food system transformation and how to utilize the voluntary guideline on food system and nutrition. We also will hear from Jeff Parker, our CEO of Australian Beverage Council and active private sectors participant throughout the policy convergence process leading to the voluntary guideline on food system and nutrition. And at last, we will benefit from the insight of Mr. Tas Tang Sombat, the president of the Thai Food Processor Association. He will provide a Thai business perspective on the challenges, concerns, and opportunities for business as related to the national and international on food system transformation. We look forward to the panel preparing our participants for the rich discussion, followed by some brief concluding remark by myself. And I try to make sure that I can come back shortly after I have to join another meetings organized by the G77 group. And I hopefully you will find this even informative again and again. Let me welcome you to this first voluntary guideline on food system and nutrition outreach events, which will be followed by one dedicated to the Americas and also Africa. And before I turn the floor to His Excellency's Ambassador Hu Kaveen to provide the overview of the CFS guideline and the CFS, I would like to inform you that today our discussion, today events will be recorded and will be available on the CFS website. Now I turn the floor to Ambassador Hu Kaveen. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency Dhanawat, Chair of the Committee on Food Security. Thank you for your great leadership, not only over the last 2 years, but certainly when we look to the voluntary guidelines on food system and nutrition. And it's because of your leadership and your support that we arrived at the consensus at the global level. And we need those voluntary guidelines to be implemented, because when you look to the staggering facts, we need action. We are bringing tourists into space. Innovations are springing up like seedlings in the spring, but not without severe consequences. I think it's a moral outcry that we still have 800 million people living in poverty and hunger. We have 2 billion people who don't have access to safe, affordable, and nutritious food. And we also know that we have 1.6 billion people with obesity. We have another crisis, the crisis that we are losing 1/3 of our produced food every year, with an economic value of $1 trillion. Think what you can do when you look to transforming our food systems with $1 trillion. And on top of this, we have the climate change and biodiversity crisis. So we know that the dots don't connect anymore. We also know that these crises are man-made, and there is a message of hope and a message for action. And we have had our Food System Summit, and I will always look to the bright side of life to see where we can find a positive way forward. And when you look to the Food Systems Summit, it's for the first time that food systems are discussed at the highest level within the United Nations, with our heads of states, with the CEOs of many companies, with heads of NGOs and heads of civil society. And that's what we need, because food systems as well as climate change should be discussed at the highest level, and they are so much interlinked. And of course, we know that we have now, and that was a clear message of the Food Systems Summit as well, we have to support action at the country level. And I think there we have a crucial and important tool with the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition. And of course, you hear criticism about the Food Systems Summit because it was not a negotiated outcome. It was many flowers to be bloomed and hopefully to be implemented. But in every statement you heard involvement of governments, involvement of stakeholders. And I must say, we have learned our lesson over the last couple of years. Often we look to governments, but it's clear that governments cannot do the job anymore alone. More than ever, we need the private sector, and we need you, not to fund the UN, but we need you for action on the ground at the country level with your companies, investing in the value chains, investing, for example, in storage, investing in people, training, capacity building. And you are more than capable of doing that at the national level with your companies. And of course, you need the support of at the global level and from governments. And with the voluntary guidelines, I think the governments have given, and of course, PSA was part of the negotiations, have given a clear signal that it can be done. And it was already said by our loved chair, Tanawat, what makes the guidelines so unique? And it's the only globally negotiated policy instrument for really transforming our food systems to be not only more sustainable, but also make sure that we can provide healthy diets to everybody. And the guidelines are presenting a systemic, multi-sectoral, science-based and evidence-based approach how to do it. It not only presents key concepts, but moreover, it gives clear guidelines for specific policies, related investments, and related actions. And not only by governments, it's also addressing the role of the private sector and what's needed by the private sector. It's also addressing what should be done and can be done by civil society and other stakeholders. And I think that's the strength of the voluntary guidelines. And the guidelines are very much interlinked and show the interlinkages between the food systems as well as nutrition and healthy diets. And we all know that we need those healthy diets. And again, your companies have shown that you are working to see how we can improve healthy diets for everybody. So we are not focusing only at the global level, we're focusing on the food systems at the national level. We're looking to the elements, for example, the supply chains, the food environments, the consumers, and to improve the ability of everybody within the food system to deliver. It's a global set of guidelines, but they take into account especially the different national capacities and levels of development. And they can only work and will only work if they are implemented. If they are implemented by governments, by the private sector, by you in your companies, together with civil society and other stakeholders. And when you look to the voluntary guidelines, you have 7 focus areas. And when you go into the guidelines, and please not only read them, but try to internalize them and see, okay, what does it mean for my companies? Discuss it in your boards, discuss it with your staff, see how you can play your role in the implementation. When you look to the focus areas, of course, the first focus area is to be transparent, democratic, and accountable governance. And governance doesn't only mean governments, it means also, for example, the private sector. And there we speak about, for example, the strengthening the multi-stakeholder approach working together as a joint effort to see how we can transform our food systems, because we know that we can transform our food systems. And you know, with your companies, I think you have a much more powerful role to transform food systems, perhaps, than any government has. Look, if you change some of your, for example, products in a more nutritious way, it has a huge impact. Governments can make the enabling environment, but you do have to do the job in certain areas. Of course, the second focus area is that we look to all the dimensions, as we always say, of sustainable development. It's about economics, it's about social, and certainly it's also about environmental sustainability. And they are not vague, because, for example, when you look into those issues, you see, for example, that we are promoting food storage, processing, packaging, and transformation, and information and reformulation. So those areas are concrete in the guidelines. We're looking also to not only to the health of the consumers, but we look also to the health, I would say, of the farm and food system workers, which are crucial. And then, of course, the focus area is that it is a joint effort, but it has to be equal and equitable access to the healthy diets, to the systems. And it's focusing, for example, on food safety areas. It's also focusing on consumers. How to do it, there are concrete suggestions. And again, if you look into the guidelines, you will find elements which certainly will be not only valuable for your companies, but will also make sure that you can build a business case for even a better market share or market access. Of course, it's about food safety. That's the fourth focus area, because we can only, and you know better than I think than all of us, at least in the government, only safe food will change our food systems. The fifth area is that it's people-centered, and people-centered means not only looking to the farmers, but people-centered means also focusing on all those who are working in the value chains in the food systems. It's about training. It's about capacity building. It's also very concrete when it comes to the role and to protect the workers in your company, the workers in the value chain. And of course, and we all know, certainly when we look to agriculture, we have to make sure that our food systems are not only balanced, but that it's also gender equality and women's empowerment. And we know, if we're honest, when you look to agriculture, women are driving our agriculture nowadays. But we have to acknowledge their roles and we have to empower them. And there you find concrete suggestions in the voluntary guidelines. And last but not least, we went into the specific element of resilience of food systems in the humanitarian context. We're also addressing elements when we speak about conflicts and crisis because of drought or climate change, how we can improve the quality of food and nutritious assistance. And it's more than only having quality products. It's also to see, for example, how we can work together with companies that we not only buy food for food assistance in other regions, but that we promote locally or regionally produced food to be used as food assistance. Those are clear focus areas, but you will be astonished how concrete those voluntary guidelines are. Again, I think COVID-19 has laid bare the problems and the shortcomings of our food systems and our value chains. But we know we can change that. We know that we have to do it with investments by government, certainly, but also investments by the private sector, by the companies, because we often speak about the private sector, but at the end of the day, it comes down to you, to the companies. And please think about those voluntary guidelines, because only when they are implemented, they can make the difference. The difference we certainly need to change. And it is a design for change of our food systems. So hopefully this important morning, this important great speakers will inspire you to fight and to go for the change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. It's really good to hear the importance that you highlight for all stakeholders involved and what private sector can provide and what they have been providing. There are some people or some representatives here that probably have much to share about what they're doing right and what they could improve and perhaps what could be expanded and scaled up. So we look forward to that discussion and we thank you, Ambassador, for that overview. Perhaps it's a good segue because into the video that the CFS Secretariat had provided on the guidelines themselves. I would suggest we dedicate a few minutes to see that video and give our participants a little bit more, a snapshot, let's say, of the guidelines as well.
Hunger and malnutrition in all its forms, such as undernutrition, micronutrient deficiencies, overweight, and obesity, are a major global challenge. The latest report on the state of food security and nutrition in the world projects up to 811 million people having been chronically undernourished in 2020, amounting to a total of around 928 million people living in severe food insecurity. 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet, which will likely rise because of COVID-19. Malnutrition in all its forms also remains high, especially for children under the age of 5. Malnutrition in all its forms has profound consequences on people's health and well-being. It affects their physical and cognitive development, and it alters their livelihoods throughout their lifetimes and across generations. To reverse these trends, countries should develop policies and undertake actions aiming to transform their food systems to deliver healthy diets and improve nutrition, and protect biodiversity and the environment. The Committee on World Food Security, the CFS, is the foremost inclusive body for coordination, discussion, and formulation of international food security and nutrition policies. CFS recently endorsed its voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition to address malnutrition in all its forms through a holistic food systems perspective by providing guidance on policies and interventions, considering food systems in their totality, and promoting policy coherence between sectors relevant to food systems and nutrition, like health, agriculture, education, environment, gender, social protection, trade, and employment. The voluntary guidelines were developed by hundreds of representatives of governments, UN agencies, civil society, and the private sector, as well as financial and research institutions. They were informed by the scientific evidence of the CFS High-Level Panel of Experts on Food Security and Nutrition, short HLPE. The voluntary guidelines are the first multilaterally negotiated document of its kind on the connections between food systems and nutrition. They recognize the strong interlinkages between sustainable food systems and healthy diets. They call for interventions within and across food systems and their constituent elements such as food supply chains, food environments, and consumer behavior to improve their ability to deliver healthy diets and to generate positive outcomes along the 3 dimensions of sustainable development. They present agreed texts on key concepts such as healthy and unhealthy diets, nutritious foods, and sustainable food systems. The guidelines focus on 7 thematic areas: transparent, democratic, and accountable governance, sustainable food supply chains to achieve healthy diets in the context of economic, social, and environmental sustainability and climate change, equal and equitable access to healthy diets through sustainable food systems, food safety across sustainable food systems, people-centered nutrition knowledge, education, and information, gender equality and women's empowerment across food systems, and resilient food systems in humanitarian contexts. We count on all of you to use these guidelines and promote sustainable food systems that deliver healthy diets. Partner and collaborate with other relevant initiatives and platforms, and promote the dissemination, use, and application of these voluntary guidelines. Use them to foster and guide inclusive dialogues among different institutions, sectors, and stakeholders within the food system. The hunger and malnutrition challenge is worsening. The guidelines are a tool to address it. Use them.
Wonderful. I hope you found that video informative and a summary, let's say, of what Ambassador Hugoven had said in more detail. I think after that background, useful background, we can focus on a rich discussion that will be helped by the following panel of speakers. So the first panelist that we have to get this discussion started is Mr. Kacha Awal from the Mission of Indonesia to FAO. Mr. Awal is one of the very active member states, Indonesia, during the policy convergence process. It is a pleasure to have you here and to gain your insights on the importance of the guidelines and what you believe is relevant for business as well. So over to you, Minister.
Thank you, Rosemary. Thank you so much, PSM, for the kind invitation extended to us, Indonesian mission in Rome. Hopefully you can hear me well. My name is Chaka Awal. I'm the alternate permanent representative of Indonesia to the Rome-based agencies. Many of my points of speaking has been taken by Ambassador Hugoven. So it will be very short then from me, because I just have to point out some of the points that have not been mentioned. For us, Indonesia is putting great importance to the voluntary guidelines, because of course, not only because of our agricultural fisheries tradition, the food tradition itself, we put a high importance to transform the current food system into a more sustainable one, into something that fulfill the need of the people, as well as to increase the nutrition of the food system. We see the principles of the voluntary guidelines is as important as the guidelines itself. So we put emphasis on how the principles of the voluntary guidelines, which is for us not only the universality of the voluntary guidelines, but also the need to put attention to the national and local context, because we believe it is important. For our case, we are the biggest archipelagic country in the world with 17,000 islands. We have our own challenges. It's not uncommon, but we have our own challenges, and of course opportunities and strength. During the negotiation of the voluntary guidelines, under the wise leadership of Ambassador Hugoven, we feel that there is the sense of togetherness. So we are in this together, all stakeholders, the member states, civil society, and of course, private sector mechanism. We feel that the voluntary guidelines is a compromise that we can achieve, the best compromise that we can achieve on this issue. We also would like to emphasize that the voluntary guidelines should be seen as an incremental approach. It is quite specific, but not prescriptive. So I have to underline, it's not a prescriptive guidelines, because of the principles of the putting more attention to the national and local context and realities. Of course, the guidelines will go towards the creation or the realization of healthy diet. But then we have to be aware also the healthy diets should be put in the context of national and local situation. For example, the healthy diets composition should be taken into account of our culture, local culture, and of course the products. For us, for example, we in the negotiation with some countries, we emphasize that the local products is important to be taken into account. For us, for example, the issue of vegetable oil, including palm oil and coconut oil, are also important. They cannot be left out from our diet. But then, of course, we talk about the nutrition, the dietary restriction, and everything. But it cannot be just ruled out. The last point that I want to bring is that the role of the private sector. Well, like I said, the local national contexts are very important. Probably the private sector can work together with the local and national actors on the research on the local diet that can be promoted in the context of transforming our food system. Of course, as Ambassador Hogoven has said, in doing so, you have to pay attention to the three dimensions of sustainability: economic, social, and environment. Social and economic and environment of the local communities must be bear in mind. The last point under this issue, the role of the private sector is, of course, supporting the national government in their effort to promote food system and nutrition, to transform food system and fulfill nutrition of the people. But then, of course, another issue comes to my mind is that how to implement this on the ground. The first step that we can do together is to translate these guidelines into our local languages, not only in our national languages. We have one national language in Indonesia, which is Bahasa Indonesia. But in Indonesia, we have more than 1,300 ethnic groups with more than 700 local languages. So we need to make them understand of these guidelines, and then we can work together to implement the guidelines according to the specific context of the local area. So I think we can do it together. Of course, we understand the government has to create the conducive environment, but then when working together on the ground, private sector, government, as well as society can work together for the benefit of our people. Thank you so much, Rosemary. Back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Awal. That was very informative, and it's good to know the perspective of Indonesia and the challenges, but also the strengths and the value you see for these guidelines. I would just note that during the policy convergence process, I think you would fairly characterize the private sector as very supportive of also the research, saying that traditional foods, such as the ones that you listed, are really important to the local context and should be accepted as important and valuable to be promoted. There is no one broad brush that can paint what is good and bad. It depends on each national context. So I think it was very good to see and hear from you about the role of the private sector, and I look forward to being able to get the insights from our members here of the business community on the feasibility of that or what is already underway. So with that in mind, I'm pleased to move on to our second panelist, and that is Ms. Susan Kavork. She's the Senior Public Affairs Manager for Nestle, dealing with nutritional matters. And she's also the member, one of the members of the private sector mechanism, very active during this process. So over to you, Susan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Rosemary. And tell me, can you hear me all right?
Yes, thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Rosemary. Look, I'd like to start off to thank the chair of CFS, Mr. Thanawat Tenzin, and also Your Excellency Hans Hogeven, because I think you mentioned 100 hours of meeting and negotiation and discussion that's gone on behind us. So I would like to thank you on behalf of the PSM and all of the private sector here, that your work, your dedicated work and inspiring words on the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition is very much appreciated. And I think, as you said, Mr. Thanawat Tenzin, that it's the only global negotiated product on food systems and nutrition. So it's really a very valuable tool. Now, I'd just like to reiterate again, because I'm here today on behalf of the private sector mechanism, and I'm also a nutritionist at Nestle. So you'll understand why I'm just going to reiterate some of the very important points that bring us here today, particularly on malnutrition, which is certainly mentioned by our previous speakers, but I would like to bring them, reiterate them again, because to me, it's very important, and it's a very important time to address these. So, particularly malnutrition in all its forms, as we know, affects every country in the world. In fact, most countries are affected by multiple forms. And I know we've referenced before the recently launched State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World, and that report estimates that between 720 and 811 million people faced hunger in 2020. And that's an increase from 2019. And the impact of COVID has been devastating, as we know. Malnutrition in children continues to be a challenge in Asia and Africa, while global obesity continues to rise. So we have enormous challenges. And that's why we believe an integrated food systems approach is needed, with all actors working together across the value chain. The voluntary guidelines for food systems and nutrition provide clear guidance to address malnutrition in all its forms. And I think particularly these guidelines are an important and very relevant tool this year of the United Food Systems Summit, which took place last month. And from there, we know that coalitions for actions are being formed. But I think, once again, this voluntary guidelines for food systems and nutrition is such a valuable tool that we can actually use right now. The Committee on Food Security brings all sectors together with member states, private sector and civil society, and we've each provided expert input into these guidelines. So they provide an integrated food systems approach with a nutrition lens. So as a PSM member and a nutritionist at Nestle, it was really important to engage in the progress and the process. And we welcome the positive references to the private sector as a partner and relevant actor throughout the guidelines. And I think, as mentioned, governments can do so much, but private sector is needed. So thank you, Ambassador Hogeven, for saying that can only be implemented at the ground level, and so much that private sector can do. So some of the areas of important importance to the private sector mechanism during the discussion process and outcomes that have come from this are particularly the strengthened language that recognises the scientific and evidence-based recommendations. So a prioritization of science and evidence is important. And also the acknowledgement of the evolving nature of nutrition science and the reference to the role of research. And I also would like to point out that, that diets are context and cultural, and we need to consider those and look at research in those. So I certainly take the point of Mr. Kaka Owel that research in traditional foods is important as well. And I think a very important part, of course, with the private sector is that processed foods are treated in a balanced manner. And of course, it's the formulation that is important, which has been mentioned as well. So it's making sure that healthy products are available, affordable and accessible. And importantly, that focuses on the importance of an overall healthy diet and less on individual foods and beverages. So it's really about the holistic approach and a balanced diet each day. And definition of a healthy diet acknowledges a wide range of factors beyond the food itself. There's really no listing of specific good or bad foods, and instead should refer to healthy diets being safe, diverse, balanced, and based on nutritious foods. A consideration of diverse science and evidence-based front-of-pack nutrition labeling schemes, which could include interpretive and informative labeling, is very important. And certainly in the Asia region, these are, we have many to come. And I think the reference to the WHO Guiding Principles and Framework Manual front-of-pack labeling has relevant nutrition profiling advice for promoting healthy diets. So we note that reference there as well. And of course, it is important that we acknowledge innovation and its role in improving nutrition and the benefits that it can bring to the food system. So we talked about reformulation, and of course, we've all been working very hard to reduce things like salt, added sugars, saturated fat, trans fats, industrial trans fats in our products. But of course, innovation is very important, and the private sector plays a very big role in this area, particularly with the research that we do. And I think we have to acknowledge the positive work of the private sector that has already been done and will continue in reformulation efforts to improve the nutrition profile of our products. And as a PSM member and a nutritionist at Nestle, I see the importance of these guidelines in bringing a collaborative approach to improving nutrition. We all have a role to play, and I think that's really, really important. You know, governments can certainly create enabling environments. We're on the ground in all the countries, and we can make a difference, and we can work together. So we do have a very important role to play. The recommendations for a science and evidence-based approach is important. The food industry is critical in its role in the application of research to provide healthy foods across the world in a safe and sustainable way. And I think that's particularly important. And Rosemary, if I could ask you to bring up those 7 focus areas of the voluntary guidelines, I think as we sit around the private sector today, we can certainly have a place or a role to play in each of those 7. I'm hoping that they'll come up, but I can cover each one of those as well. I think when we look at being transparent and democratic and accountable governance, I think that's certainly an area where we private sector has a role to play in being transparent, and I think also transparent in our communication, transparent in our communication to consumers is particularly important. I think food safety is one area that the private sector certainly brings to the table. And this is important because packaged food is safe and it is shelf stable, and it can provide safe food in difficult times as well. Sustainable food supply chains to achieve healthy diets. Certainly we have to work right across our value chain and ensure that they're sustainable, and working with all actors, right from farmers, working closely with farmers, educating farmers, right to the consumer at the retail level. So we have a place actually to play in every area of the food supply chain. People-centered nutrition, knowledge, education, and information is certainly very important. And we have a part to play in educating consumers, providing information on PAC, providing information through some of our programs, partnering with governments, raising awareness of micronutrient deficiencies and sources of micronutrients. There's many areas where private sector can play a role as a partner to governments and others. And also thinking about people-centered nutrition across the food chain as well. Being sure that people have equal and equitable access to healthy diets through a sustainable food system, and certainly thinking about sustainability across the food system, but also thinking about affordable and accessible healthy diets for all is very, very important. Gender equality and women's empowerment, and I think particularly looking at at the agricultural area, bringing youth and bringing women back into the agricultural area is something that certainly private sector focuses on, and certainly we do at Nestle as well. So very, very important to be in this area. And finally, creating a resilient food system in times of humanitarian crisis and context. And that's where private sector can also play a part. So I think my message to the private sector on the call today would be to look at those 7 focus areas and think, where can you play a part on the ground, and where can you make a difference? So I'd like to thank you, and back to you, Rosemary.
Thank you so much, Susan. It was a very valuable insight, and I thank you for focusing us on what we're already doing and what we can improve. And I think the business have a lot to discuss during the questions and answers, and perhaps sharing those practices that they'd like to do or that they're currently doing. So with that, it is my pleasure to give the floor to Professor Dayrit. He's from the Ateneo de Manila University, and he's going to provide a concrete example of what we've been hearing before, the importance of a traditional food, in this case, the virgin coconut oil, and especially within the context of COVID and the challenges in the region. So let's put our thinking caps on and learn from him. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you, Rosemary, and good day to everyone. Good morning and good afternoon. Special greetings to Ambassador Hans Hugiven and Mr. Tanawat Tiansin. If I can have my slides. Okay, thank you. So I'm very pleased to be able to share with you the results of our study on the efficacy of virgin coconut oil against COVID-19. I hope that this presentation will be considered with the voluntary guidelines, in particular with regards to the health impact of saturated fats such as coconut oil. What I'll present you is the first of a series of ongoing studies on clinical studies on the possible use of virgin coconut oil as a functional food against COVID-19. Can I have the next slide, please? Next slide, please. Okay, so first, what is virgin coconut oil? As you can see in the figure, mature coconut meat contains about 35% coconut oil. So that this is meat from coconut about 11 to 12 months old. Now the coconut meat is a mainstay of many tropical diets, such as curries and numerous desserts. Actually, if you look at where coconut is grown, there's probably close to 1 billion people who take coconut dishes as part of their traditional diet. Now, you can take the coconut meat and extract it, and there are 3 ways of extracting it, and obtain virgin coconut oil. So following the definition of Codex for what a virgin oil is, VCO is obtained directly from fresh coconut meat without chemical processing. Next slide, please. Now, this is the key feature of coconut oil. These are the fatty acids of coconut oil. And highlighted here is lauric acid. This is a 12-carbon acid, fatty acid. It's accounts for about 49–50% of coconut oil. So it's a high lauric acid in coconut oil. It's about more than 60%. So next slide, please. Now it's the raw lauric acid, which I will highlight in this presentation. Now these are the beneficial properties of VCO, which I will go through in the next few slides. First, the efficacy against comorbidity. We all know that COVID-19 hits worse those who are obese and those with high blood sugar. So what does VCO do about comorbidities? What is the evidence for the antiviral property of VCO? And what is evidence for immunomodulation and anti-inflammatory effects, activities of VCO? So next slide, please. So this, let's take the comorbidities first, the obesity. Now what you see here is a book which is published by the World Health Organization, Western Pacific region, Diet, Food Supply, and Obesity in the Pacific. And to quote from this book, it says, people were 2.2 times more likely to be obese and 2.4 times more likely to be diabetic if they ate imported fats than if they ate traditional fat sources. And of course, among their traditional fat sources is coconut oil. Now on to another study. This study was done in Brazil in 2009. effects of dietary coconut oil on the biochemical and anthropometric profiles of women presenting abdominal obesity. And the conclusion from this study is that coconut oil gave better outcomes than soybean oil in terms of reduction in abdominal obesity and waist circumference. They gave higher HDL and improved the ratio of LDL to HDL. So next slide, please. So that is the obesity. Now let's look at high blood sugar. Now here are two articles on diabetic rats. And basically both studies show that feeding rats coconut oil protected against dyslipidemia and glucose intolerance. The next slide, please. And this is a human study, a case study, a 66-year-old man with a history of type 2 diabetes, which is managing with insulin. So after supplementation of coconut oil in his diet, this man was able to decrease his insulin requirements. So he took less insulin because coconut oil addressed his diabetes. Now, as to the antiviral activity, this is a study way back in 1982, which an in vitro study, which showed that monolaurin, which is one of the metabolites from coconut, their effect on envelope RNA and DNA viruses. So the conclusion from this study was that monolaurin was tested in cell culture against 14 RNA and DNA lipid-coated viruses, and it disintegrated the virus envelope by more than 99%. And another study in 1994, lauric acid prevented the binding of viral proteins to the host cell membrane, thereby preventing virus assembly. Now, these were not done on SARS-CoV-2, but even other viruses. Now, regarding the immunomodulation and anti-inflammatory properties, these are two studies, one done in the Philippines and another done in Indonesia, on the use of coconut oil against HIV patients. And it showed that they increased their CD4 and CD8 counts in both studies. And the lower two studies are on rat studies, wherein on the lower left, they disabled using doxorubicin, their immune system, and VCO was able to improve their immune system. And then on the lower right, rats fed with VCO suppressed inflammatory mediators and oxidative stress. So next slide. So those are literature studies. And now I go to the clinical study on VCO against COVID-19. So this study was published in the Journal of Functional Foods last May 2021. Virgin coconut oil is effective in lowering C-reactive protein levels among suspect and probable cases of COVID-19. So in a sense, this was the first study. It was a bit moderate. And the study design was that it was randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled intervention study. So this is the gold standard for RCTs, or clinical studies. And there were uniform meals provided. The control group had nothing added, while the intervention group was VCO was added, and it was a 28-day feeding study. So next slide. So there were two parameters mainly monitored. One was the recovery from COVID symptoms, and it showed that recovery from the VCO group was more rapid than the control group. So even at day 2, when the subjects were taking half the amount of VCO, they would, compared to the control group, 70% by day 18 was faster at day 18 in the control group by day 23. So more rapid recovery. Now, C-reactive protein levels is a measure of inflammation or infection. The line 5 milligrams per liter is sort of the borderline. It's above 5, then it's inflammation or infection. If it's below 5, then there's no inflammation or infection. And clearly here, the VCO group had faster relief from infection than the control group. The CD4 level was also higher in VCO than the control group. Yes.
Professor Dayrit, I'm going to have to ask you to conclude, and then hopefully we can expand on this during the discussion, the question and answer.
Okay. Yeah, sure. Okay. So anyway, the other parameters mentioned, like fasting blood sugar, VCO was better. So overall, the study really showed that VCO was effective against mild COVID-19. So we're now going to more cases of COVID-19. So on that, I'll just end here. And so these are the lipid levels which showed that VCO had no problems, it improved. So yeah, so that's the study that we're currently undertaking.
Thank you so
thank
much,
you for your attention.
Professor. If palatable to you, I would love to share your findings and your material with the participants as well. And I'm sure they would be able to follow up with you on any questions that they might have. Thank you so much. And with that valuable example out of the way in terms of a traditional food and the value that it could provide within the region, I'm really pleased to be able to give the floor to Mr. Jeff Parker. He's the Executive Director of the International Council of Beverages Association for the Asia Pacific Regional Group and the CEO of Australian Beverages Council. Over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Rosemary. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to join with you here today and participate in this critically important next step in the life of the guidelines. As Rosemary mentioned, I wear a couple of different hats, and it's in the context of the International Council of Beverages Associations, or ICBA, in the work that we do as part of the private sector mechanism, which I'll be providing some brief comments here today. The ICBA would like to echo Susan's remarks and recognise the stewardship of two of our esteemed gentlemen on the call today. The chair of the CFS, Mr. Thanawat Tiersen, and His Excellency Ambassador Hans Hugeveen. Thank you both for your stewardship and your leadership of this collective work in bringing these guidelines to fruition, which is a significant accomplishment under both of your leadership. Having been involved in only a relatively small part of the over 100 hours of negotiations of the guideline, I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Ambassador Hugeveen's patience and perseverance and influence on the process. The global non-alcoholic industry is honoured to have been able to support and participate in the development of what has been mentioned before, the first ever globally negotiated guidelines on the critically important topic of food systems and nutrition. Along with member states and the important input of civil society. Given this event here today is being held in Asia, ICBA would like to thank its members in the region for their support in the process, including member companies and the Australian Beverages Council, and also to our friends and colleagues at the Japan Soft Drinks Association. These guidelines, and indeed the process of developing them, underscore the immense complexity of food systems and the critical importance they play in supporting healthier populations and a healthier planet. There are some immense challenges in front of all of us, but with this comes opportunities, and members of the PSM are ready for what lies ahead. These guidelines recognise the importance of and are an exemplar for the multi-stakeholder participation, and the beverage industry is committed to helping implement them. The beverage industry is also pleased that, as mentioned previously, these guidelines provide science and evidence-based recommendations. And I wanted to share with you just a couple of examples how some of this guidance is being actively implemented already. 3.2.4E of the guidelines, as an example, encourages the private sector to make efforts to reformulate foods and beverages by reducing the content of nutrients of public health concern, such as excessive intake of sugar. Across Asia, there are numerous examples where this is happening already. In Australia, the drinks industry has committed to the government to reduce sugar across its portfolio by 20% by 2025 and is ahead of its trajectory to achieve this. Associates and colleagues will know this commitment was similar to that which was in Singapore, and the industry continues a close collaboration with the Ministry of Health and the Health Promotion Board in that country to reformulate and support the government's war on diabetes. In other markets like Thailand, the government is encouraging reformulation through other measures as one of a number of important initiatives to improve the health of its people. And there are many more reformulation examples, not just across the region, but across the world. Additionally, Section 3.5.1b of the guidelines recommend that governments consider approaches to reduce the impact of children of inappropriate marketing of foods and non-alcoholic beverages. The beverage industry fully agrees and supports this recommendation, and in fact has had in place long-standing and fully implemented commitments to not market our products to children across all types of media, including internet. Importantly, this has been achieved with the support of governments under a self-regulatory framework of codes and complaint and enforcement mechanisms. Those of us who were spectators of the UN high-level meeting on NCDs in 2018 will know the policy coherence and convergence between the political declaration of that high-level meeting on NCDs and some of the recommendations in the guidelines. And that confluence is critically important as we head to 2030 and beyond. The PSM and its members look forward to supporting the implementation of the guidelines across businesses, some of which is already happening. And on behalf of the ICBA, thank you again for the opportunity to be here today. Back to you, Rosemary.
Thank you, Jeff, for those words and those very specific examples of what private sector are really doing that is aligned to the voluntary guidelines. I thank you for that. And I am happy to introduce our last panelist. Mr. Tost is joining us from Thailand. Mr. Tost is not only a Thai business person, he's also a member of the Thai Chamber of Commerce. It's our pleasure to have you here, Mr. Tost. Over to you.
Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished guests and participants, it's quite a pleasure to be with you today. As president of the Thai Food Processor Association, the association is comprised of 6 member groups with 221 companies, and its revenue is around 18% of the total revenue of the food business in Thailand. Consider from the paper and the information I received from the panel, I would like to share the statement of Thailand quoted from the 47th session of the Committees on World Food Security in 8 to 11 February of 2021. They are saying that Thailand is engaged to end hunger and malnutrition in all its forms, and food security and nutrition are a top national priority. The government promotes healthy diets and well-being at all life stages, with particular focus on early life stage, during which exclusive breastfeeding is encouraged. So we are having the target that by 20 to 25, at least 50% of the Thai infants will be exclusively breastfed for the first 6 months of life. The campaign called Empowering Parents Enable Breastfeeding, collaboration with WHO and UNICEF to raise awareness on the importance and benefits of breastfeeding. Also, in terms of enabling equal and equitable access to healthy diets through sustainable food system, the government stimulate local production for producing healthy food. I mean, not in the factory scale, but for the hawkers and food vendors also. We introducing Q mark, and we introducing like a easy guideline for GMP and HACCP for local factory for the small SME, for the small and medium-sized business. And during COVID-19, Thailand, we are successfully contained the COVID-19 on the first wave, because we are the second country who infected by the disease, but we can contain it in the first wave. Now we are in the fourth wave, but still we are going strong, because the factory has obtained what we call the factory sandbox in order to distinguish the workers that having a problem, having a disease, from the healthy workers, and this can make the factory continue the production without any delays, and also within our logistics system too. According to the information from FAO, predicted that by the year 2050, and this insecurity for food, and Thailand are well aware with that. That's why we're introducing the BCG, bio, circular and green policy in this country, and the industry are well aware, and we are adapting ourselves. We are venturing into we call it future food, which will use our agricultural based products to extract protein from plants. It's a plant-based meat, plant-based protein. We're looking into the insect industry in order to produce a supplement protein. And we are well aware that in our country, by the year 2050, the population will approaching the aging society, and maybe population will decrease half. We are having around 60 million people now, and it's maybe reduced to 33 millions. And this will be a challenge for our industry. So that is roughly my presentation, and the about the concerns and opportunities for business.
Thank you, Mr. Tust. That was very...
In Thailand, we are well prepared. In the future, so we do not have much. We see only the opportunity. Thank you, Rosemary.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tust. That was really, really insightful, and good to see what the government is doing, as well as business. Really great examples. Thank you for that. So now I'm pleased to be able to move to the question and answer portion. And here I open the floor to all of our participants to raise their hands, and you'll be unmuted, or unmute yourself, excuse me, and pose questions for these panelists, or comments in the chat as you wish. So I pause here and allow for questions. For those of you who are new to this, there should be an option at the bottom of your screen under reactions. You can raise your hand. I could get the discussion started. I can break the ice a bit by asking our panelists, whomever would like to speak about the food systems transformation. What does it mean for business? In light of the VGF, the voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition, are there concerns in how business can adapt? Can you share any examples of what you think are good practices going towards quote unquote transformation? Anyone want to take that?
I understand the goodwill of FAO and the WHO in order to counter the malnutrition and it's like a, how you call the the disease that are not from the infectious and
Non-communicable.
yeah, non-communicable disease. Yeah, and even in Thailand, they are posing the excise tax for sodium intakes and sugar intakes, and the industry, we are quite cooperate with that. But what we are concerned is the too much, too much campaign that may discourage the consumption, and this will hurt sales and business, and not just the factory, but as you know that in food business, they are concerned a lot of stakeholders from farm to the factory. And as you can see that the sugar industry in Thailand now, the sales is dropping, I think more than 30 to 40% now, thanks to the policy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tusk. I see a hand raised by Ms. Uni Bandu. Over to you.
Hi, Swadika, Kuntanawat and Kuntut. My name is Rosalind and I'm speaking from Thailand. I'm the founder of Arcadia Fine Foods here. I in particular have a very strong interest in the use of traditional herbs or traditional natural foods as medicine. And I'd be very interested actually from the perspective, from Thai perspectives, what you feel and think about the recent use of things like Fatalajon or Grachai Dam in combating the symptoms of COVID, firstly. And then secondly, just more broadly, Thailand and many other Southeast Asian and Asian cultures have a long history of traditional medicine. How do you see this figuring into our future food systems, Ka? Thank you so much, Ka.
Thank you, Rosalind. I believe that a question might be best suited for Professor Dayrit or anyone else in the panel, but perhaps Professor Dayrit.
Yes, well, thank you for the question. Well, as you know, we're studying VCO, but then we're also studying other plants like Vitex negundo, because there's, of course, you won't find any cure against, you won't find that in the traditional literature that they're antiviral, but many of them do have properties, and a number of studies have been done using in silico studies to show whether these compounds contain any compounds, whether these plants contain any compounds that would bind to the target proteins in SARS-CoV-2. In our case, in the case of VCO, it's more, I think, of a metabolic property. It certainly needs more study, and the plants have to be standardized. I think the safety is not really an issue. So I think it's really up to the countries to investigate their use. I know in Indonesia, they're quite active in this, because I've seen some studies that they've come out, as well as in Malaysia.
Right. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you for the question, Rosalind. Jeff, I see you've raised your hand. Over to you.
Thanks, Rosemary. I think just in regards to your question around businesses and how they might be thinking about this from a transformation perspective, and certainly there are other people and other panelists who represent individual businesses, but I guess from an association perspective that represents many businesses, I guess how they view these particular guidelines are really about providing an opportunity to bring speed and scale, I guess, to sort of that transformation of portfolios that has been happening for quite some time. Now, Susan touched on it in her presentation on the panel. Certainly, I touched on it a little bit from some of the words that I mentioned around some of those, reformulation that is happening, but it's much broader than just reformulating products. It's really sort of this portfolio renovation that has been happening across lots of different companies and lots of different sectors, and reformulation is a very, very important part of that. But it's much broader than that, and it's about marketing, lower sugar, no sugar, lower fat, no fat, lower sodium, etc. It's about different pack sizes, It's about, supporting different guidelines, in, schools and other settings. And so I think, guidelines like the voluntary guidelines for food systems and nutrition, I think give companies and associations and sectors an ability to think about sort of where else can they be looking to, as I mentioned, bring speed and scale to sort of this transformation agenda that in many instances has been happening not just for years, but for decades. Thanks, Rosemary.
Wonderful, Jeff, for the focus. And over to you, Susan.
Thanks, Rosemary. And thank you. I agree with Jeff too. And I'd just like to say, just want to answer your original question that you had. And I think it's a big journey that we have in regard to thinking about taking this, integrated systems approach, which is really what this year has made us all realize. We can't just act in one area. We have to think about the impact across the whole value chain. So for us, for example, and I know for the private sector mechanism companies, it's thinking right at the beginning. It's thinking about the farm. It's thinking about where these products come from, but also thinking about the people that grow those foods and thinking about their welfare, thinking about their rights and thinking about their nutrition. So as a nutritionist, I would also say very important to have a nutrition lens right across the food system, right across the value chain. So really super important, which I think these voluntary guidelines for food systems and nutrition do that, which is really important. And I think coming in with a very much even going beyond sustainability, thinking about a regenerative approach, thinking about renew and restore. So thinking about not just taking and destroying, but how can we feed the world and do it in a regenerative way, just like nature does. So I think it's, we've got a big journey. So we're thinking about a lot of things that are integrated across the food system. But I think business is at the table, and business is is willing to be and must be part of that, because we are very important. But we have to work together. So all together, I think we can make a difference.
Thank you so much, Susan. I see a question in the chat by Ms. Vera Nadimpali. She asks all of the panelists, or not one in particular, but how you think the private sector should be directing investment. Is the need or the focus on research only? Is there anything else? Who would like to elaborate on that?
I can, Rosemary.
Thank you.
Yes, certainly. Yes, I think investment is once again, back to my integrated food system approach, is right across. So it is investing and working with farmers, very important. So not top down, but working with them, empowering them, enabling them to have viable businesses, so they have a decent income, and also to think about nutrition for them. I think also looking at all the work we need to do and I have been doing and will continue to do in reformulation and research. Yes, is super important, because we have to think about how can we feed the world in a sustainable, safe, nutritious way. So research and innovation is very important. So I think it's investment. If we're going to do things in a looking at a sustainable food system, we need to think about investing a lot into right across the value chain. A lot is happening, at the early part of the agriculture part, but it has to be distributed right across. There's a lot of work to be done, but I think we've also already on the journey very, very well.
Thank you very much, Susan. I don't see any hands up or questions in the chat. I do take a moment before I give over the floor to Chair Tianzin. I wanted to thank all of you, but more importantly, tell you that the private sector mechanism, as the representative of the private sector mechanism here and coordinator of all the private sector input in these processes, it's our task to keep you informed. And we look forward to your participation in these processes, because your input on the ground is so important. It's important to know the regional constraints, the feasibility of these outputs that come out of CFS. They're not all related to nutrition. We have some underway on gender and they're only valid to the extent that they reflect the national and not only the international exchange and what we believe is best, but that they can be replicable, implementable on the ground. So please do reach out to me in any way you'd like to get involved. So with that, I'm pleased. Oh, maybe there is another question in the chat. No, just some thanks for our panelists. I would like to give the floor to the CFS chair, Mr. Tanawat. Over to you to deliver the closing remarks.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rosemary. And also I would like to thank all speakers, panelists for your active participation and also sharing your views on the role of private sectors, governments, and others, our stakeholders, researchers, how you can work together in order to promote the uptake and implement the voluntary guideline on food system and nutrition. As all of you already mentioned several times, private sectors and business or agri-food business are key actors to help us achieve in order to produce healthy food or healthy diets for all. You have knowledge, you have capacities, and also you have capitals. And that's why it's very important that we need to join our hands from governments and also private sectors to move forward, to have a better, to build better food system for all. And also the work on food system transformation not end when the Food System Summit ended on 23rd of September. It's just the beginning. We still have a long journey that we need to work together among all of you to ensure that we can achieve the SDG. And also I would like to thank all participants and also all the questions that you asked. I think is very, very important. Producing the healthy foods, healthy diets is your commitment, and also the commitment of the private sectors to have a better food system for our planet is also another challenge that agri-food business need to revisit and review how you produce, what is your strategies for the better, for our better futures for the agri-food system. And that's why today, when the private sector mechanisms are initiated to have such a kind of dialogues among the business, is a good start, because we need to bring the global policies and translate the global policies into action at the country level, at the local level, and business and private sectors. You are the champion who can continue working at your network and also with your government. And that's why in terms of the private sector mechanisms of the Committee on World Food Securities, we need your engagement. We need your support. And also we would like to get more participations from business and private sector around the world to make sure that at the CFS, these committees, we are open the floor to all of you, to all stakeholders, private sectors, civil societies, researchers, and others. Because when we're talking about food, food is not the issues that the government can work alone, but we need to join our hands, our effort among all stakeholders who are working around food system. And that's why today is a good start. And next week, I would like to encourage to all of you to participate in the 49th sessions of the Committee on World Food Securities. And one of the issues that we will discuss next week, especially in the morning, we discuss about the state of food securities and nutrition in the world for 2021. And you will hear the government and also other stakeholders to give their interventions, their statement, what they are thinking about the situation. And on Tuesday, 12th of October, we will have the forum on uptake of the CFS voluntary guidelines on food system and nutrition. And as you have heard several times by Ambassador Hugovins and also our panelists, private sectors play a central role with other sectors, with the government, with civil societies, with consumers, because the markets and consumers are demanding. And you as the producers also need to ensure that you meet that demands from our consumers. And that's why today I would like to thank all of you again and look forward to seeing you at the CFS 49 next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Ambassador Hugovin, would you like to close with any remarks?
Thank you very much. I will be very brief because I think with our strong chair, Tanwat Tenzin, I would like to echo his words. If we really want to transform our food systems, and which is absolutely necessary, it's a joint effort where the private sector plays a crucial role amongst others. But certainly when it comes to food systems and value chains, perhaps the private sector should be even more in the lead than governments. But let's make it a joint effort of governments, private sector, and certainly also civil society and NGOs to make sure that we achieve food security, leaving nobody behind. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, Chair, Secretariat, and all of you participants. Have a good weekend and thank you for your time today.